Without further ado, this is this month's topic. As I say, we've had questions coming in. I'm going to answer at least 30. For those of you who are doing your math, that means I'm going to be going really fast because loads of people asked some really interesting things and we didn't really want to kind of say no that we were full up. So it is going to be quite fast paced. If I am talking, giving an answer to a question that you're not particularly interested in about accessibility, don't worry, another one will be along in 2 minutes. And as I say, if you want to let me know anything in the chat that you want us to kind of touch on later, because for some of these questions, we've literally got 1 or 2 minutes. There's going to be quite a lot of links in here because a lot of the things actually we've touched on in other webinars that are already available for free up on HiHub. So I'll give a few hints to what's in there, but then I'll link through to the full version, if you like, on there. So hopefully that will work for everyone. So for those of you who weren't here at the beginning when we were starting, I'm Jonathan Hassell. I'm CEO of Hassell Inclusion. I've been doing this accessibility thing for over 20 years now. So I know a lot. I've got Usman with me. The one area that I'm not quite so hot is the developer side of things, and we've got some great people at Hassell Inclusion who really go deep into that from a full kind of developer view. So Usman's going to be answering some as well as we go forwards. But let's go into it. So the first couple of questions are around staff accessibility. So this came from KTM. She was asking about the HR, how can they make sure that everything is accessible in the recruitment and onboarding process? And that's a really, really good question, because for many organizations, they just think about accessibility as for their customers. And thinking about accessibility for customers of your website or whatever is a really good thing. But, you know, here at Hassell Inclusion, we have a number of members of staff who have a disability. That should be the norm in all organizations. But the key thing is then, how do you make sure that everyone has a good experience of your digital tools internally? And that goes all the way through their employee journey. That's how we would describe this. So we did a whole hour on this back in December 2021. So you can find that with the link at the bottom of the screen there. Just a couple of things that I wanted to kind of pull out of that to answer the question specifically. So we've created some neurodiversity guidelines recently for the National Autistic Society. A lot of people are really interested in neurodiversity, especially because it's not really covered quite so well when it comes to WCAG. So just a couple of things from that. These are actually both taken from our webinar back in March when we were looking at this specifically. When you are doing interviews, be aware that the background behind you, if it's a really strong red color, might be off-putting to some people who are autistic. Calm colors in general help people who are autistic to bring their best selves to an interview, whether that's if it's happening in a room or whether it's happening over Teams or Zoom. So one thing there for interviews. Another thing for onboarding, when someone is actually offered a role and is starting, you'll probably have loads of learning they need to do. E-learning can be really great for people who are autistic. Sometimes they find that a lot more easy to process than something which is face-to-face. So a lot of digital can be really helpful for them. So it just gives you a flavor of some of the things that are available there. The next question that came through was from Sebastian. He was asking about what happens now in terms of hot desking and things like that in the environment. Some of us are in the office, some of us are at home. How does that work for people who have access needs? And that's a really great question for this year, because this is a slide from my trends deck in January. This is the year of hybrid everything, really. We've got hybrid meetings because some people are in the office, some at home. Hybrid conferences, we've done a lot of that. Even hybrid shopping is something that we're helping a number of clients with. The other hybrid actually is the link between digital and physical. So most of the time when we're thinking about accessibility, even if we're thinking about touchscreen accessibility, we're thinking about someone with a phone or maybe an iPad. But actually a sign-in tablet, you have to think not just about the digital stuff, but where it is physically. So all of those sorts of things are really important for you to be thinking about as people go back to the office. But in terms of, if you like, how reasonable adjustments, so how people with disabilities, the things that they need adjusted about a job for them to be able to do at work, there's a few kind of notes here. So in the office, if you're back or remembering how it used to be, a lot of people with disabilities actually got the sort of technical equipment they needed, maybe a big screen or something like that, but actually might have preferred to have worked from home anyway, or at different hours that would have suited them. And actually, a lot of them found that the working from home culture that came through the pandemic was a real solution to a problem that they had. Obviously, the really important thing was that all of those reasonable adjustments from the office needed to go home with them. So the problem with the home was that oftentimes they had the environment that they wanted, but if you like, the big screen was back at the office. Now where we're at is a situation where sometimes we're in the office, sometimes we're at home. And so actually people might need sort of equipment in both places. Also, because the office isn't quite so important, a lot of people have let their offices go. And so there's a lot of hot desking happening as people go back to the office to use the space more wisely. How do you find your desk if you're blind? And it could be anywhere on this floor. That's the sort of thing that we've been discussing with the RNIB actually recently. And these are the sorts of things to think about. And just one last example. This actually came from one of our clients, HSBC. They've realized that it's really important when people go back to the office if they have something called a personal emergency evacuation plan. So if I, for example, was blind and the fire alarm went, how would I get out of the building? Oftentimes, the way that would happen is I would have a buddy who was assigned to me to make sure that happened. But if I'm in the building and my buddy isn't, because they're working from home that day, that's a real problem. So there's a lot of tools that are actually being put together at the moment to help that happen. Cool. We're going to move on to the next bit. So this is Betcham talking about some of the problems with digital divide. So I hazard a guess that this person might actually be in part of the world where internet is slow or maybe mobile. And you might think that that's not a question about accessibility at all, but actually digital inclusion and accessibility do connect. Obviously, you need the ability to get online to be able to have a good experience. And obviously, accessibility sits on top of that. But the great thing is that a really good friend of mine, Bruce Lawson, who was at Opera for a while, and a lot of things that he was finding there was when people made their websites more accessible, normally the page weight was smaller, so they downloaded more quickly on slow internet connections. So actually one thing can help the other, which is great. And that really is essential because a lot of parts of the world actually it can be mobile, quite slow mobile connections, which are the way of getting the web. As I say, we've done some really good stuff in Ethiopia, and we're working with a lot of organizations who work in the third world. So as I say, if those are particular issues that are important for you, we'd love to have your questions on those. Next question that came through, how can organizations make digital inclusion and digital accessibility reality? How can we build a strategy for this? Making it a reality normally from our perspective is somebody asking about buy-in. Accessibility happens in organizations that are willing to pay for it. And that could be, budget, or it could be people having the time to be able to do things. The number of organizations we work with where the people say, oh, I do accessibility off the side of my desk in my spare time. And they're always wanting for that to be their full-time job rather than something that they do kind of, because they love it. So on HiHub, we've got a buy-in toolkit that gives you loads of really great stuff to help you get some of your stakeholders on board if they're not yet. Just a couple of things from that to kind of give you some motivation for them. On the left, we've got a slide from our benefits workshop. So make sure that the people at the top of the organization know what sort of benefits they can get from accessibility. On the right is making it real and making it understandable for people in an emotional way. So actually introducing people to people who have disabilities can be a great thing to actually help them understand why this is a really useful thing to do. As I say, we have things called speed dating that do that, and our clients absolutely love them. And getting that strategy together, well, that's what we did last month. So again, I'm going to point you to HiHub. The video is there. What we did was we used our scorecard to help organizations work out how far they were on their maturity journey right at the moment and how to use that to kind of plan from there. So it's all on HiHub. Go grab it. A lot of people love that session. So The next one, and as I say, I've tried to take all of these questions and link them through, so there is a bit of a thread going through. They're not sort of random, and you'll see they come from very different aspects of accessibility. Some are more technical, others are more strategic, others are more sort of policy based. This one is the more strategic side of things, and 3 different people asked questions around prioritization. How do we prioritize things? What's the logical order for stuff? What do we do first? And again, the slightly ironic thing is that is next month's webinar. So the whole webinar next month is looking at those sorts of things. So I'm going to point them in that direction for detail, but to give people something for now, a couple of angles to be going on with. So the first one is the product perspective. So for example, if you've got an audit report that comes back with, say, 60 things you need to fix, what should you fix first is a really sensible question to ask. And we have a prioritization mechanism that we use that is a lot better than the kind of high, medium, low that most use, to enable you to understand which things to do first and how much time and effort is it going to take to actually kind of fix things. We have accessibility statements that we can create for organizations to actually kind of help them mitigate risk whilst they are fixing things. So I was literally working with one company this morning who said, our bosses say they want us compliant by October, but we don't think that's possible because we've got so many things to fix. The accessibility statement is the sort of thing that kind of helps you. It enables people to know you know you've got issues. You're not perfect yet, but you're working on them. From an organization perspective, you could also be looking at these things. Should we be spending all of our money on testing, or should we be spending our money on training, for example, because actually that might be a better priority for us. So we have training on all of these things. And again, if you sign up to HiHub, you'll find a lot of these things on our HiHub for free. So go into there and have a look for those. So this one was really interesting. So accessibility is great if you can take people with you. And Teresa's question is about how do you kind of raise awareness with people who don't think accessibility is anything to do with them? A network engineer is mentioned here. And again, we actually started off, this was pretty much the first question that we dealt with a couple of years ago when we started doing these webinars, because it's a common thing, typical objections to accessibility. It's not relevant, it's too expensive, we shouldn't do it now, we'll get to it at some point, all of those sorts of things. But what Teresa is talking about is how you do this for people in different types of jobs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example from, so we won't all have network engineers. I'm not totally sure I know what a network engineer does. So I'm going to pick developers, because probably you've all got some of those. And then we're going to see how this would apply. The key thing that we found, and we've been doing this for decades now, is to try and help people understand that accessibility will help them win the things that they care about. So developers initially might say, yeah, we'll do accessibility, and then just kind of try and hope that you kind of like run away, forget about it. Or if you kind of push them, they might say, well, actually, we don't have time, or we don't have the resource, or actually the boss didn't say that we needed to do that. It's not my fault, it's the designers. I'm sure you'll have heard all of these sorts of things. None of these is somebody who's trying to be sort of like nasty, but what they're doing is they're trying to work out, how can I get this into what I'm doing? Because I'm pretty busy already. So what you want to do is to try and help people win. And the way you help people win is to understand what winning looks like for them. So most developers, I know, actually like new technologies. In fact, they like making sure that their CV has as many new technologies on it as possible. That is something that makes them better than the developer next to them. In some parts of the world, being quicker than the developer next to them is a better thing. Some parts of the world, better quality. And accessibility can be seen as a blocker to some of that. Is this a new technology? Will it make me slower? That's the sort of thing. You need to work out how you can get accessibility to appeal to their own selfish instincts, if you like, because we all have selfish instincts and they're not bad things. And if you can appeal to them, things are good. So there are some new technologies in accessibility. It's really interesting that most developers I know are obsessed obsessed with WAI-ARIA because it's something they can put on their CV. But semantic HTML, getting your heading tags right or whatever, it isn't a new technology. So they kind of don't really care about it, which is kind of interesting. A key thing these days is if people want to work in the best organizations, accessibility is going to be required. We're training more people than ever. I know you can't get a job at Google or Apple without knowing something about accessibility or getting trained really, really quickly. So it's an aspirational thing. It's not something weird that's being asked of them. Actually, if they get better at accessibility in your organization, when they leave, they are more employable. That sort of thing kind of helps people get there. So that's the general kind of gist of how we kind of try and take people with us. But what about people who don't think it's anything to do with them, the non-affected groups that Teresa was talking about? Well, there is one thing that we all create, and yes, this is a lovely segue to this, which is documents. So every single person on the call will be creating documents all of the time. The thing that I'm sharing with you is a PowerPoint, which is a document. And making those accessible is as important as websites and all of the rest of the things, which is why no less than 5 people were asking about document accessibility and the thing that normally goes with it, which is PDF accessibility. So everybody actually needs accessibility, even if they're not doing anything on your website. So what do you need to make a PDF accessible? We need to get it right in the source document. A PDF comes from a Word file or a PowerPoint, InDesign, whatever it is. You need to save things out as a tagged PDF. That's the term for an accessible one. And know if you're on Office 365 like we are and you're using a Mac, if you save as PDF in the Office application, so on the desktop, it doesn't tag things. But if you go into the browser version of PowerPoint, it does. So there are some really odd little things in there that you really need to know. So all you need to do is to get it right in the source document, save as tagged, and then publish it, and you'll have done probably better than 90% of people out there. So what do you need to get right in the document itself? Well, and this is a very old document from an old client of ours, so they're happy for us to share this. It's things like headings and lists and images and tables and getting color contrast right, these sorts of things. I don't have time to take you through all of this today, but I'm just going to give you one example about how easy this can be. Headings. So on a website, you would put them in as heading 1 or whatever. In Word, you just use the heading 1 style or the heading 2 style. If you forget the styles and just use bigger text, it won't come through as a heading. So actually just giving people that knowledge actually makes all Word documents so much more accessible than they would be otherwise, especially for people who are blind. So it can be sometimes as simple as that. Otherwise, there are some really great automated tools. So Office has got accessibility checkers in Word and PowerPoint, which are pretty useful. For G Suite, it's not part of the standard, but you can actually download an accessibility checker from the Google Workspace Marketplace if you just Google it. It's completely free. So those tools will help you get going better on this. And they don't check everything, they don't get everything right, but they're pretty good. To get it really right, you need some training, and we're training more people in PDF accessibility than ever these days. But a lot of it is just really taking them through what tools are available, how to use them best, and using examples of their own documents to do that. And so, as I say, if you need any training or people in your organization do, please let us know. So I'm going to segue into images. So images are one of those things you need to get right in your documents, your websites, everywhere else. There's a few questions that came through around images. The first one from Miriam was, okay, what is alt text? When should I use what? So alt text is there. I've got an image. I've got somebody who's blind who can't see that image. Their screen reader reads things out as text. What should it read to explain what that image is? And it's all about the purpose of the image. So for example, if the image is an image of text, the alt text should be text to say what that text is. If it's a button that goes to somewhere on the website, rather than describing the button, it's a lovely button that's green with an icon of something on it. It should say what happens when you click it or select it with your finger on a mobile phone. If it's meaningful, say for example, it's the picture of a dog, and we'll come back to that in a moment, it should say what it is. But if it's just there to look pretty, maybe it's a background image, then it should have null alt text, because actually the person with the screen reader is missing nothing if nothing is read out to them. So there is a decision tree. It was created by W3C, who wrote the WCAG guidelines. It's really good. We use it in our training as well. So, and you can go get it for free. So as I say, if you're fast enough, you can type that in now, or just wait until a week and you'll be able to replay this video back and get all of the links from there. So that's alt text. I'm going to just try and move to the next slide, which somehow has, there we are. Okay, jumped a few forwards. Give me 1 second. So the next question was this one. So we had a number of questions about online art, and actually art in museums and things, stuff that is there in galleries, and what do you do with alt text for these? So again, so I thought this was a really good example of actually talking through what purpose means. So if you've got an image of a graph, then the purpose of the graph is to get across some, maybe some financial information. They say a picture tells 1,000 words. If you had 30 to sum up this graph and what it means, what would those 30 words be? That's the kind of challenge there. The interesting thing is when it comes to images of art, what's the purpose of an image of art? Well, it kind of depends on what sort of site it is. If it's a museum, then I want to appreciate that work of art, even if I can't see it. So it might be who painted it, when did they paint it, what's the subject, is there something about it that's really important, like the brush style or something like that. If I can't see it, can I understand something about it without seeing it? That would be in the alt text of that image on a website, or it would be in the touch tour or the audio description if I was in the museum. But if actually the website is trying to sell me art, then the really important thing is I need to know enough about it for me to want to kind of buy that work of art, if you see what I mean. So it's all about what the purpose is. And it can be really, really fascinating to try and create alt text for these sorts of things, because, as I say, it can be very, very creative and can be kind of, a little bit difficult to do, which is why I think Wendy asked this question. So the gist of her question was, I think she has a disability herself, because she says we disabled people, and she's dealing with people who are service providers who she terms ignorant because they have no or little information about accessible information. What can we do about that? Well, the first thing to note is that it is the law, especially if those people are actually providing a service for the public, for them to actually provide the right information. As I say, if you're in government or a public sector body, it would be a PS bar in the UK. If you're in the private sector, there is a different law, the Equality Act, and it would be the same in whatever country you're in. But in general, it's important for people to get this sort of stuff right. The problem is, as Wendy's saying, often they don't know. So thankfully, the legislators are doing some chasing now. PS bar's been there since 2018. They've been checking things since 2020. But the people who are doing the checking are finding that when they provide a report to the service providers, they don't know what to do with it because they don't understand accessibility. That's why these sorts of sessions and our introduction to digital accessibility sessions are so useful, because what we're talking about here is a bunch of people who just don't know what they're getting wrong. So if you find some people who are getting things wrong, point them to these webinars. If they need more training and information, we can help them there. But they can get some really useful stuff here for free. So hopefully that might help. So what about training options for accessibility? This is what Hannah was asking about. She knows some stuff already, but can she get some qualifications? And training is massively important. As I say, it's cheaper to actually get things right from the start, because you know what you're doing with accessibility, than get things wrong, find out with an audit just before a website goes live, and then try and work out how to fix it. It's one of the reasons why we do so much training. We have 15 different courses, depending on the type of people. So designers need to know something different to developers, etc., etc. But the key thing here really is You need to know, are your people any good who are creating websites, documents, whatever it is for you? Do they need some training? And if they do need some training, what's the best way of doing that? Again, we did a whole 1-hour session on this back in November last year, which is available up on HiHub, so you can go and grab that from there. But it's a couple of things. Yeah, if you haven't asked people, are they any good at accessibility, you have no idea. If you have asked people, but you actually haven't assessed whether or not they are as good at accessibility as they say they are, you still have no idea. So we provide a lot of our clients assessments, which they can give to, for one client, for example, over 1,000 people. They all spend 15 minutes filling it in, and we give that organization an idea who's good and who isn't, who needs some training. It's not to try and catch anyone out, it's to try and make sure that that training can support them. So that may be helpful for you, and if it is, please let us know. The accreditation that was being talked about, yes, there is some. You need to work out who's providing it. Is it up to date? And what does it prove you can do? So most of you will probably be aware of the IAAP. They're a really good organization, the Institute of Accessibility Professionals. The key thing here is their certifications that you can use. So for example, if we look at the one in the middle here, which is WAS, which is the Web Accessibility Qualification, does it give you what you need? That's the thing you need to be thinking about here. And from our perspective, these courses and these accreditations don't give organizations enough information to know, if I employ this person, they're going to get things right. They kind of mix things up. So there's not enough code knowledge required to be accredited under WAS for a coder, because it's mixed in with some stuff about design and other things. And from our perspective, what you want is, I'm employing a coder, do they know what to do for their job? I'm employing a designer, do they know what they need to do for their job? And you don't really get that with the IAAP stuff. You do as a result of our training. So we provide accreditation exams in our developer training, and especially for our auditors to do that. So yeah, be wary. What is it really saying that you can do? Is it enough? So that takes us into the whole area around training, around guidelines, around the tools that people would use potentially for doing testing. We've got a couple of questions came through from Pamela and Parminder asking about this. And what they're really asking about is this thing here, the embed capability in the ISO standards that we created, which are all about, so if WCAG tells you what tests you need to do of a product to check it's accessible, the ISO 30071 Part 1 standard tells you what tests you need to do on an organization to know whether or not the organization is likely to be able to create things that are accessible. So are people trained? Do they have policies? Do they have the right tools, the right processes? So it's all in here. So there are loads of tools available. There is more every month. Please don't try and sort of like look at all of this slide. The key point here is there are lots. And the question is, which are the right ones for you? And also, you need training in how to use these, how to get the best out of these tools. Some of these tools are free, some of them are expensive, some of them over here are rather disreputable, and we wouldn't suggest you go to those at all. So you need to work out what tools to use. But again, having the right tools isn't enough. You need to work out, for example, if you're testing things, where to put them in your process. You know, how much of your site should you test? When should you test things? Who should test things? Should it be your QA testers, if you've got some, who can do things internally, or should you be always kind of sending things out to organizations like ours that can audit things? What's the best way of doing this? That's the strategy you need to put in place, and that's what our ISO kind of helps with. Fundamentally, you need to train people. And you also need to make sure that the guidelines that you're using are appropriate for the sort of products that you've got. So it used to be WCAG 2.0 AA that everyone used for websites and everything else. It's now 2.1 AA, but it's worth knowing that if you've got a native mobile app, there are guidelines from Apple and Google, and different types of products might use different guidelines. So how do you choose which ones to use? Again, the great thing is another free webinar that we did, I think this one was February last year, was all about how to do that. So some really helpful things there, hopefully, if you've got that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over, just have a break for a second, to Usman, who's going to take us through this particular question that came through on the development side. Usman, over to you.
Okay, so this question is from Peter, and he asked, we have a requirement to use a drop-down to allow a user to switch between different content tables. Right now, we're using aria-live polite, covering the table when it changes so that announcements are made. Okay, so let's break this down into a few scenarios because there's a few questions in there. Firstly, scenario A, whereby we are making use of a drop-down to switch between different content tables. Now, rightly so, as Peter has already recognized, there aren't many examples of a drop-down being used in this way, especially on public-facing websites. So it may be confusing to some users. And perhaps you are considering using aria-live because using a drop-down in this way is an unconventional pattern. So it's good that you recognized, firstly, that you don't tend to see this often. If it's more specific in an application whereby you have a given user group who are familiar with this pattern, it may not be the case, but generally you don't find that. Now let's also discuss screen reader users who typically know how to find content if they are aware of how something is expected to behave, and also if appropriate semantic elements are used. So for this reason, we wouldn't endorse making use of aria-live for not only large amounts of content, but also small amounts of content if it's not really necessary. So scenario B now, let's take a look at that. And that is for a tab panel to switch between different content tables. Now, this is a much more familiar web experience for many and does help in reducing the number of users that may find the drop-down experience confusing. So out of the two, we would go over using the tab panel over a drop-down, but generally our recommendations in this situation would be to consider familiarity in user experience. Right, so out of the two, we would say, yes, the tab panel is a better experience over a drop-down, but also think of alternatives and their benefits. There's an accordion panel which could be used. So what would be the benefit of that? Well, a user could do a comparison of the tabular data by having multiple accordion panels open. So there would be a benefit of that. So it's really dependent on the nature of the type of content that you're trying to present to your users. Another important thing we want to make sure is that we are adding or including a heading above whichever given solution we choose. And that could be visible in terms of for everyone, or it could be screen reader text and specifically just for screen reader users. So it really depends on the kind of, again, the heading that you're trying to present to users. Now, another thing we'd recommend is not using aria-live, but potentially, possibly, depending on your solution, to apply focus by using tab index with a value of -1. As this would give both screen reader users and keyboard-only users control in terms of how they like to consume the content. Now, generally wouldn't recommend to do or to control focus for tab panels or accordions, as it seems a bit invasive, but in scenarios such as a modal implementation, that would be good because we are now moving focus in a different context. And the last thing is to definitely ensure that your tables themselves are accessible. And this seems to be a big challenge. Complex tabular data is very difficult to present in an accessible way. And what we'd recommend then doing is to break down your tables so that they're not really complex. When you tend to have multiple columns or breaking down your tables in a much more complex way, that does not help. So if you simplify them by having more simple rows and columns, that definitely makes a difference. That would be the recommendations there.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, Usman. So you can see there are so many different elements of accessibility. But we wanted to make sure that there was something in there around the more sort of practical developer side. Thanks, Usman. The next question, in some ways, couldn't be more different. This is looking at identity verification systems that use mobile phones and require photos of identity documentation. And we've done some user testing in this area with people with disabilities over time with various different organizations. Here are a few things some insights that come from that. So how many hands are you expecting people to be able to control at the same time time is the first thing. So being able to hold something and take a photo of it is not possible for everybody. So are you making assumptions that don't hold? Similarly, some organizations have required people to do a selfie, but they didn't want people to just upload something that wasn't real. It needed to be live. So they've actually said you need to copy this gesture. What happens if you can't? So these sorts of things are okay, but there needs to be alternatives. That's the key thing, alternative ways of doing things. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the territory you're in. This was Johnny and Dan who were talking about reduced motion on websites. What do you have to do? And they're talking about this WCAG criteria 2.2.2 that says that if you've got animation that lasts for more than 5 seconds, you need to have a way of turning it off. They're unclear as to where the 5-second rule comes from. I'm also unclear where that rule came from as well, because WCAG didn't really say why. We do know that obviously the longer something that goes on for, which is annoying, the more annoying it is. But here's some of the things from our research from the key people who can be really triggered by this. So this is people who are autistic. They would really prefer no auto-playing movement on pages, pause button for carousels, and in general, they don't like movement. Some people were saying that it makes them feel seasick if there's kind of like continuous movement in the background or something like that. But others were saying it's okay if it's small. So there is no hard and fast rule on this sort of stuff. I think the key thing here really that we would say is it's two things. First one is the extent of the movement. So if the movement is a very small thing that you can sort of like forget about, that's okay. But if it's a lot of movement, say a large carousel ticking around, that sort of thing, that can be really off-putting. You can't get away from it. And the other way of getting away from it would be to control. Did I ask for it to do that, or do I feel out of control? Those are the sorts of things that are important here. Elisa was asking, what was the #1 thing you can make in the best practice guideline for digital accessibility? Depends who it's for. For managers, we want them to care about accessibility. So the guidelines should be about checking out what there is to win. And for product owners, we really want them to have that experience of how are people using our product. So getting some user testing done of it, or getting a live audit done, the sort of things that we're doing every week to give people an understanding, a real understanding of how these sorts of things work. And in general, if there's only one guideline I can have, is go find somebody who has a disability and talk with them, because that's going to be your thing. That's why we do a lot of our speed dating. It really, really helps make this stuff come to life. Mark was asking, how do you start creating an accessible design system? And he's onto a good thing here, because there's loads of potential for accessibility. And if you're trying to do this, we're helping loads of organizations do it. As I say, we've got training, we've got consultancy that can help. So get in touch and we'd be really happy to. Emma was asking about writing for accessibility. And again, she's bang on the nail here. I oftentimes apologize to people who write, because accessibility seems to have considered what they do not important. If you think in WCAG 1.0, making sure your language was simple was a level A thing, so the most important thing. In version 2, it was AAA. That's the stuff that everybody forgets, because WCAG couldn't find out a way of you testing for that. So they took something that is the most important thing and they relegated it to the stuff that everybody forgets to do. That's not a good thing at all. And we're still waiting for WCAG to actually sort of catch up with all of our training, which says that this stuff is really, really important to do. So yeah, if everybody needs this, what do you want to do? My computer's just running a little slow, so I'm just going to read through this slide whilst my computer kind of comes back to me. It's slightly frozen this end. So people who are blind, for example, there we go, want things to be as terse as possible. If you're having to listen to every word on a page, you want the number of words to be as little as possible and to be in a really direct style. So people who are blind, they want things terse. People who have a learning difficulty, for example, or are dyslexic, want you to be using as few words as possible and the most uncomplicated words. The key thing is WCAG did a really bad thing in pushing this out to AAA so everyone forgot it, because they didn't know this thing at the bottom of the screen here. They were worried that they couldn't come up with one thing that everyone would do. And this is the type of thing they were worried about. So if I'm creating a page on a website for financial analysts, so really kind of serious financial analysts, the language I use will be different from a website where it's just a banking website for us all to use. So, and what you need to do is to make sure that your brand values are in your tone of voice, and you understand the audience for a page and make the reading level of the page right for that page. That's the thing that WCAG sort of didn't get their head around a long time ago, and thankfully things are coming back. The design of text matters as well, so it's a couple of different ways my book could have been printed. The full justification actually made a lot of these kind of hyphenations happen, which makes it harder to read, so we decided to make sure that everything was left justified. Didn't look as nice, easier to read. Sometimes you have to make these sorts of adjustments there. Natalie was asking about what are the gold standards for virtual events, was asking about things around captions and ASL. She was kind of 1 month early because September is the month where we think about sort of hearing impairments a lot. Just one note on sort of ASL and sign languages. Sign languages are different between countries. American Sign Language and British Sign Language are different, and the number of people who use them is really small. For example, in the UK, 24,000 people are using British Sign Language. There's 11 million people who have a hearing impairment who would actually just prefer captions. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't include sign language as part of, if you like, their gold standard. It costs a lot and not very many people need it. Captions can be a much better way of doing things. So captions, make sure that you've got them live in the event like we have. Make sure that you put them through into any replays so that they're there for the video, but also there as a transcript. And most people forget that it's not just people who have difficulties hearing what I'm potentially saying who need assistive, if you like, tech. Anybody who can't see the slides will have been missing anything that's on them. So all the way through, I've been making sure that they haven't been missing anything. I've been speaking through the important stuff on the slides. That's the equivalent of audio description for video, and that's the sort of thing you should do as well. Ajani was asking about older people. How do we make sure that things work well for them? Most of WCAG applies, but there are a few things that are really, really important. Here are just a couple. So a lot of people who are older are losing their sight, but not all of it. They may be having difficulties in their peripheral vision. So if you've got a page that opens up another tab in a browser, they may not be aware that a new tab has opened. So they may think the button, if you like, doesn't work. That's one of the reasons why actually having that little icon or something that says opens in a new window is so important. A lot of people who are older have tremors with their hands. So if they're using a touch screen, for example, the size of the thing you have to touch is really important. If I've got a bit of a tremor, if I have to be really precise to touch the right thing, you've probably just lost me. We have a poster for a lot of these things on our website. So as I say, once this is done, you can come back on, find all of the URLs and get what you need from there, or just go to our search and just put in older people or aging, and you'll arrive at where you need to be. So these are sort of some of the requirements that people have that maybe aren't in WCAG. So that was Katie's question, how do you ensure you've captured all of the needs that are out there, and how do you measure that you're making a difference? So yeah, it's good to make sure you're capturing all people's needs. It's there in the international standards. However, don't reinvent the wheel. WCAG is really, really good. It's just got a few blind spots, if you like. That's the reason, for example, why we didn't do loads of research to recreate WCAG for blind people, because it's really good at what they need. It's not really good at what people who are autistic need. So the National Autistic Society asked us to create specific guidelines for them based on research. So those are the sorts of things that you should be thinking about when you're thinking about looking at user needs. In terms of measuring impact, this is what we would term return on impact stuff. We have a workshop that we run for a lot of companies, because it will be different for different companies and different Otherwise, if you're a company that sells lots of stuff, then it's really important that people can buy those things. So that's going to be a key thing for you. If you've got loads of customers, you want to get as many of those customers doing customer service online as you can get, because all of that is going to cost things for you. So it really depends on, your impact. You want to be measuring it, but it's how to make sure that is working well. So I'm hoping that my computer is going to come back to me. It seems to be freezing a little bit at the moment. Give me 1 second. Usman, are there any questions coming through in the chat?
So yeah, I just answered one. This was in relation to a design system question that clients, this was from Mark, and the challenges in terms of the client understanding or really having a good knowledge of how difficult or the type of investment a design system is. And I think it's really important if you're implementing a design system for a client and it's not for yourself, that they're fully aware of the type of investment. It's a huge investment. The amount of effort that needs to go into not only, it's not even just the technical side, but it's also the branding. The involving multiple teams here, bringing them together into creating the fundamentals of the design system, and then moving on to creating even more complex components, which can then be taken and developed into more complex templates. So as long as they're aware, it definitely helps in terms of taking a project like that into fruition, because then the investment upfront is one thing, but even beyond that, most teams have a huge challenge in maintaining this type of project because it's huge. When an organization has implemented or made use of a design system, when changes start creeping in, how you bring about those changes across the organization, that is the other thing. So we had a similar thing in when I was working in a previous organization, and having a brand which can be recognized by various different sporadic teams across the organization, and making sure that they're aware of your design system and how they can implement it is a key challenge here. And also, like I mentioned, maintenance. Jonathan, are you still there?
I think we might have lost Jonathan. So unless anyone has any final questions, we'd love you to join us next month. We're going to be looking at how we prioritize when there's lots of different things that can be focused on. So we'd love you to join us for that. It's been great having you here. And also there's a link to HiHub there as well, in case you want to check out any of our former webinars there. We'd love to see you on there. But thanks for joining us today, everyone, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are.
Thank you, everyone. Hope that was helpful. Bye.